welcome to this session on navigating the complexities of trauma and resilience with oral storytelling. And it was very lovely to see the list of stories that were popping up in the chat. I really found that sort of energizing, at the same time quite connecting. One story that from my childhood is about a man, a tree, and a banana peel. I call that the banana peel story because I don't know the name of it. And that's a story that sticks with me almost every day. Like I see that it's like this thing that I can apply to almost everything that, almost every circumstance that I go through. I can say, yeah, that's a banana peel. That's a banana peel story at work there. So welcome in to everyone. Welcome Geraldine, welcome Carol, Megan, anyone else that I haven't been able to mention you by name just yet. People are still coming in, but we will go ahead. Just inviting everyone to just take a moment with me to arrive in stillness. Stillness can look like a lot of different things for different people. For some people, it might look like just turning off the notifications on your phone and setting it aside for a moment. And just, committing as best as you can to being present for the next few minutes or for as long as you can be with us. We completely understand if you can't stay for the entire mindful lunch session. And if you can, if it's available to you, maybe closing your eyes or just lowering your gaze. And just taking a deep inhale, if that's possible. And exhale. And then taking another deep inhale, if that's possible for you. And when you exhale, seeing if you can make the exhale just a little bit longer than the inhale. So extending the out breath. And try that one more time. So one more deep inhale. Then a deep exhale. Slowing that down. Pushing that out for as long as you can. And when you're ready, opening your eyes and returning to the Zoom room. Amazing. Lovely. So welcome in again, everyone. My name is Patlee. Those of you I haven't met yet, haven't had a conversation or told a story to just yet, or heard a story from just yet. So I'm the lead facilitator and founder of the Reyou Mindfulness Collective. And I'm so happy to see so many persons join us today for today's Mindful Lunch, and really excited to see all the new faces with us. So for those of you who are new to Reyou, just a little bit about us and what we do. Reyou helps individuals and groups build meaningful connections that support mental well-being and strengthen community and capacity. And resilience, community capacity and resilience. And we do that through fee-based and individual-based, fee-based services for groups and individuals, but we also provide free resources and tools to our online community members, as well as, people outside our community from time to time, just like we do here with Mindful Lunch. So Mindful Lunch is a monthly lunchtime speaker series where we get to share some of the tools, wisdoms, experiences that help to feed the Reyou mission of building meaningful connections that support mental wellness and well-being on a personal and professional level. So in our personal and professional and community life. And of course, you can learn more about what we do when you visit the Reyou website at www.reyoumindfulness.com. And I'll ask my colleague SJ to just pop that link in the chat so you can find it whenever you need to.
already there. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, SJ. So, our guest speaker for today's Mindful Lunch is Amna Burki. Welcome, Amna. Amna is the lead facilitator and storyteller at StoriesMatter. She uses the power of storytelling to promote oral literacy and understanding narratives, and to engage community. So thank you so much for joining me, Amna. I'm really happy you could be here today.
Thank you, Patlee, for having me over. I just wanted to share a little bit of how we met. There was a point last year when 3 people had asked me, have you met Patlee? Have you met Patlee? Have you met Patlee? Within a week. And then I think it was Kate that we actually ended up meeting with. So your name was popping up everywhere. I see Geraldine here. She asked me, you have to meet Patlee. So it was coming up so much, and I'm so grateful for the work you're doing, Patlee, because I've experienced it myself. I took a journaling course with you a couple of months ago, so that was delightful. And I encourage everyone to be part of Reyou community. It's amazing work and community building in that group. So before I get started on what I do, which is doing storytelling, one of the things I get asked again and again is, what do you mean? Do you take a book and read it out loud to people? What is oral storytelling? I found the best way to explain it is through a story. So join me for a story that I'm going to share with you and see what storytelling, sharing folk tales is all about. This story is called 3 Dolls. There will be a part of the story which is interactive. So for that, I would request all of you, if you can have your cameras on, so we can have more faces in the room. I get very excited when I'm sharing stories. And this story is originally from India, Indian subcontinent, and also a similar story exists in the Persian heritage. Once there was a king who loved solving puzzles, riddles, and all kinds of challenges. One day he announced that whoever brings me a puzzle that I'm unable to solve will be rewarded handsomely. So the king received a parcel and he opened it. And inside the parcel, there were 3 dolls. He picked up the first doll, looked at it. It was exquisitely beautiful, handcrafted, hand-painted, and he gently placed it beside him. Then he took out the other doll, the second doll, looked at it, and the doll looked exactly like the first doll, beautifully crafted, and he placed it beside him. And then he took out the last doll, the third doll. And again, like the first 2 dolls, the doll was beautiful, exquisitely carved from wood, and he placed it beside the second doll. And inside that parcel was a note. And he opened it and it said, find the difference between these identical dolls. Now the king was puzzled. He looked at the dolls again. He examined them one by one, wiggled their arms, wiggled their feet, looked at them upside down, sideways. He could find no difference between them. Not a single difference. So he turned to his advisors, good people like yourselves, to ask them, what is the difference between these identical dolls? And they said, good people like yourselves, that why don't you, do you have any suggestions?
Maybe tap on it to see what they're made out of, each one?
Yes, so the king tapped on it. It was the same sound coming from each one of them.
Maybe squeeze them really hard to see if there was a difference in weight or squishiness.
He took a scale and he measured their weight, and they were exactly the same weight.
Could it be the order at which he brought them out from the box? That is the order. I mean, it brought them one after the other. So could that be the difference? You know, it brought them, not at the same time, but at different times. So could that be the difference in the dolls?
Yeah, so he tried that, and again there was no
Yeah.
difference between the dolls. What else? Anything else?
He sliced
Hair
them.
color.
Could they smell different?
You know, he smelled each one of them. Oh, was that sandalwood? Yes. Love the smell of sandalwood. Each one of them was made from sandalwood. And like the good people like you are, his advisors couldn't come up with anything that was different between the dolls. So now the king said to himself, a wise king like myself would have a lot of wise people that I could have access to. Why don't I invite my resident scholar to examine the dolls? And his resident scholar came in. He spent hours pondering over the difference between the dolls. In fact, the king was so annoyed by the end of the hours that the scholar spent on the dolls that he took the dolls away from him and said, you know what? Let me find my court jester. Perhaps where wise people fail, the court jester would find something which is different about the dolls. So the court jester came in and said, Your Majesty, how would you like me to entertain you? And the king said, I don't want any entertainment today. But before he could even listen to the king, the court jester had started juggling the dolls. One by one, they were going in air. And he said, Your Majesty, perhaps somebody's trying to fool you. There's no difference between the dolls. Look, they weigh the same. They smell the same. There's no difference between them. Now the king was getting annoyed with him. So he, one by one, took the dolls from him and placed them before him. And he told him, please leave. You obviously don't know the difference between the dolls. Then he invited his court storyteller. And the storyteller came in and she examined the dolls, just like the other two. But again, she found no difference. She said something profound. She said, Your Majesty, when we don't see the difference on the outside, we have to figure out a way of going inside. And the best way of going inside is through the ears of people. So before the king could even react, she leaned forward and plucked one of the hairs from his beard, his long, straight beard. And the king said, ouch, what was that for? And she took the first doll and that strand of hair, and she started threading that hair through the ear of the first doll. And would you believe it went in completely? And then she took the second doll, and before the king could even have time, a chance to react, she plucked out one more hair, and he said, ouch, but he knew what was coming. She took the second doll and threaded the hair in. And instead of it going in, it started coming out the other ear. And then she took the third doll. And this time when she plucked the hair from the king's beard, the king didn't even react. He was too mesmerized by what was happening around him. So she took the strand of hair and she started threading it in through the ear. And instead of it going in or out the other ear, it came out from the mouth of the doll. It went in straight and it was all curled up. The king said to the storyteller, Storyteller, you have solved the puzzle. Well, what does this mean? What does it mean? So the storyteller took the first doll and she said, this is a person who takes in everything that is happening around her, all the tragedies, the comedies, the traumas, the information, the knowledge, but isn't able to share that with anyone. As for the second doll, everything this person experiences the tragedies, the traumas, life circumstances go in one ear, but out the other. And then she picked up the third doll. As for this doll, everything that is experienced, tragedies, traumas, good times in life, knowledge, information, this person is able to take it in and then share it with others, like storytellers, healers, people like Patlee who gather us in these communities. This one is a storyteller. The king was amazed by that explanation, but asked, "Storyteller, you have shown us what is the difference between the dolls, but you have created one more puzzle for us. Why is it that my straight hair went into the ear of the third doll and it came out curled up? Why is that?" And the storyteller said, "Your Majesty, that is because everything a storyteller hears comes out with her own special way and twist." Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that gift, Amna.
Yeah, I love this story. It's absolutely delightful.
I'm gonna reserve my thoughts for it and just invite, like, if anyone has any comments or any thoughts that you want to share about that, to come on forward. Like, feel free to unmute yourself and come on forward, or if you'd like to type it in the chat, feel free.
I just love to see all the smiles on everybody's faces as you're doing the last minute or so of the story.
Thank you.
Hi, Amna. Lovely to see you and lovely faces here. What I want to share is, like, you make me go back when I was a little girl, like so mesmerized with your story. And it's like, it's a beautiful feeling, beautiful feeling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amna. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you, Geraldine. Oh, Amna, that's such a beautiful story. I love that story. Every time I hear a new story from you, I go, "That's my favorite story to date." I just love this story. This is an interesting story, and it's so amazing that you chose this one for this session where we're talking about the complexities of trauma and resilience, because I like those three dolls are just so emblematic of so many ways that we could talk about this idea of trauma and resilience, to be quite honest. And it's really hard to narrow it down to just one way that we want to think about it or spin it. But I know for me, one of the many things I'm thinking about as we talk about the complexities of trauma and resilience, and without trying to pretend that we're trauma therapists or anything like that, I think it's really useful to sort of recognize that, as Gabor Mate says, that trauma isn't a thing that happens to you. It's the way that your body remembers, I think, the thing that happened to you, right? And so this idea of the dolls and, something goes in and it stays in, versus someone that something passes through, and someone who is able to take it and turn it into something else, able to transform that into something else, I think is really so emblematic about a lot of the conversations that we have around, this idea of recognizing that individuals are walking around with stress, chronic stress and traumatic stress, right? And I recall reading a statistics from the National Library of Medicine that talks about, you know, the fact that 60 to 80% of people experience traumatic stress, and that the number is much higher when we start to count, you know, or when we start to put things like adverse childhood experiences into that, you know, experiences of parental neglect and attention, you know, the inability to get the kind of attention and the kind of care that they need as children growing up in a household. And that just makes me think, because at the same time, the number of people who end up being diagnosed clinically with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, is really very low. It's 6%, according to the same National Library of Medicine data. And so that says something about where we are with resilience. Like, we can experience these events, these actions, these activities, but we can still come back from it in a way that really embraces the idea of resilience being the ability to be flexible, to grow around obstacles, and to resource yourself through situations of change, which I think is just interesting. And so to have the storyteller speak to that with this representation of the three dolls, one that is absorbing and not letting out, one that is getting it and it's just passing through, so it's not registering, and then one that is holding, taking it and turning it into something else that creates a new story, is really very interesting. And that, I think, is really sticking with me. The thing that it makes me think about, though, we can think about it from a communication perspective, but we can also think about it from a people that we're meeting everyday perspective, right? The people that we're coming across, you know, in our daily life, people that we're working with, the people that we're helping, the people that are, you know, the cashier at the checkout counter, or boss or supervisor. Like, how is that person showing up at work today? How, Amna, do you think we could use a tool like this and even other oral storytelling tools to try to connect with people who are, you know, the embodiment of those kind of three doll personalities that the storyteller highlighted there?
Great question, Patlee. I think for me personally, the realization that there is so much power in oral storytelling has changed my life personally. I fell in love with the tools and the ways of gathering community that storytelling provides, so much so that, you know, I changed careers to now be full-time storyteller or use storytelling in different ways. It's, you know, like how Geraldine was saying, it reminded her of that space that she remembers as a child. Why is it that we stop those moments from our childhood where we heard these stories? Because one of the things that I keep hearing is that folktales is for children. No, they weren't originally for just children. They're for all of us. And this is how the common people passed knowledge, information, how to navigate life. Like, if you think about the origins of storytelling, we as human beings are storytelling creatures, and that's how we process how our day went. Like, think about a fire crackling and people gathered, a tribe gathered around the fire, talking about their ancestors, talking about how their day went, talking about their future and what they want to pass on to their generation. So storytelling provides this healing space that we're missing in the world. We are still surrounded by stories, but we're mostly consumers of stories, and sometimes very negative stories, right? So if you think about news stories, they're always about something going wrong in the world. So where do we bring in our own stories and stories where we can heal from? And we're all carrying so much trauma. It's not, and those spaces are not there anymore as much as they used to be, you know, when we were part of communities that were gathering every evening to share those moments. I will give you some examples of what is so powerful about stories. There's something called stickability, which means that stories stay with us. So even from today, if you were to reflect a month from now, what you actually remember from this session, you will remember the stories. So if you wanted to pass on some information or knowledge to someone, you're not going to give your child do's and don'ts. They hate that, right? But if you made that same message into a story, children would remember that without feeling this urge to reject whatever you're saying. So we know statistically that people remember stories 10 times more than just data. So it's very significant. I will give you examples of two examples that come to my mind where you will see some very dark themes that are covered in even fairy tales. Like if you will, I think some of you mentioned Cinderella. Cinderella has lost her mother. She's in a very difficult situation family-wise. She's surrounded by very unhelpful adults. And in that story, we find a way how this young girl finds her path. She navigates those circumstances. So we play out different characters in stories and find out, instead of living through that experience, we learn from that experience. So that's another power of storytelling. And actually scientists and anthropologists and psychologists were very curious about why is it that children who know more about their family history are more resilient. So why would you think that's the case, if I were to open that question to any of you? Why would knowing your family stories make you more resilient as a child?
I wonder if it then you have examples of how your ancestors have navigated through difficulty and challenges, and you would more easily be able to apply that to your own situation because of the shared.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Megan, for that. So, say you are coming from a place, your ancestors came from Eastern Europe or somewhere else where they dealt with a war or pogroms or whatever they were dealing with, or starvation, mass starvation. When you know that grandmother Jenny or great-grandmother Jenny overcame that, so whatever is happening in my middle school, I have what it takes to handle it, because somebody from my ancestors went through a lot worse. Also, we know one of the protective factors for children to develop their resilience and to navigate traumas is having a caring adult. We know that. And that means when we're sharing family stories, someone took the time to spend with us, to share those moments with us. So that shows that connection. Our grandmothers are known as kin keepers. They keep our families together. And they do that with, not just sharing their recipes, but also their stories. So that's one example. One more quick example of how stories save lives is, and this is one of my favorite ones, is how many of you remember the 2004 tsunami that happened in Asia? You remember that? Yeah. Okay. So at that time, UNDP, which is United Nations Development Program, found a tribe just off the coast of Thailand. So they were the closest to the epicenter of the tsunami. They shouldn't have lived, but there were 0 fatalities in that tribe. They're called the Moken tribe. And what the scientists discovered was that they had a storytelling tradition that talked about what to look for in a tsunami through a story, through a folktale. And one of the things in that was that if the water level recedes, the ocean is going backwards, go uphill. So you would think logically, if the water level is going back, you would go towards the ocean. They did the opposite, and that's what saved their lives. Not only their lives, the tourists who were there, they made sure they went uphill as well. So their system, their traditional storytelling, their folk tales, not only were faster and more protective than the scientists and their early warning systems. So stories, these kind of stories can save lives. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on how, indigenous cultures have so much wisdom in them and what we can learn from them. We're living through climate crisis. We have so much wisdom there on what to do. So those are just some of the examples. And Patlee, I could talk for a couple of hours, so tell me when it's enough.
No, I think you're doing beautifully, and I just love that. I'm thinking and I just want to read out like some of the points that were coming up in the chat there about that question of why knowing your family stories are really important. Is some of the answers we're getting is that it gives us a stronger identity, and that knowing our family stories can make us stronger. Just like you said, because if you know that your grandmother had survived this, then this is really, really small. And someone made a point, this is from Christine, that she's reminded of how stories can touch us in a way that telling facts never can, and we can connect emotionally to them on a deeper level and internalize their meaning in a much better way. And I think that and then we also have a new point in the chat, connecting with family reinforces the individual. Thank you for that, Steph. Reinforces me, Steph says. And she knows that from that, she's not alone. So it's like having that piece of your family, your ancestors, your culture, an embodiment of it that's walking around with you when you have that connection to a story. It doesn't even matter, I don't think, if it's a story that comes from a family member, or if it's just something that you've heard being passed through your family from one generation to the other. It doesn't necessarily have to be a story that is cultivated within your bloodline, so to speak. I know you had brought 2 stories to share with us, Amna, but I'm mindful of the time, so I want to just jump to my other thing, and to just ask you, what did you bring for us today in terms of like a tool that we could introduce to the audience as something that can help them sort of take storytelling with them into their day?
Okay. So I believe SJ is sharing the document, right? What I have for you is a practice that is so easy to do. So if you think about, many times people wonder, I'm not a professional storyteller, so how can I share stories with, my family? But this is a practice that anybody can do. It's called name storytelling. And what you do is basically, so basically at your dinner table or over, if you have friends over coffee, an icebreaker for meetings, corporate events, or even at community gatherings. I've used this practice many times in gatherings, and it's always a great icebreaker and a way to get to know each other. So we will put you in breakout rooms for, I believe, 3 minutes, and you'll be paired off with someone. And please discuss, what is your name story? It can be your first name, your last name, or if you have a middle name. Does your name have a meaning? Who named you and why? Are you named after someone? What is your relationship with your name? And does your name get autocorrected? That's just a fun one in the end. And yeah, so you don't have to discuss all of these questions, but if you get to see some of them, I think that would be great. So I think we're ready for.
There were some good things coming out of the groups, or they did have time to connect. Would anyone like to share with us about their breakout room experience? Yes, Kate.
I was with Joyce and Paula and Mallory, and I felt like in a very short time I got to know so much about them, and we laughed and smiled a lot. It was a really beautiful connection.
Wonderful, thank you. There is always something wonderful when you ask someone about their name, isn't there? Like it's almost like you cannot not smile about it when you hear someone tell you the story about their name or ask you the story about your name. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Kate. Anybody else like to share with us anything that came up in their groups or the experience of talking about the name?
Go ahead,
Oh,
Mark.
Okay, so I met with Stephanie and a lovely dog, and and well, we spoke about our names, and she told me the story about her name and how she ended up being called Stephanie and not Justine, which is quite an interesting story. Within that short frame of time, yeah, I got to know that Stephanie actually means crown. Yeah, so that's it.
Okay, cool. Well, you learned something new. So, Steph, I didn't even know you had a different name. So, we'll have
Well,
to say that name story at some point together.
that's what my mom wanted to name me, but it didn't turn out that way. But, Mark and I had a really wonderful chat too about the history of his middle name and where his origins are and where he's from and the story of how he's calling home right now. So that was it was very lovely actually to get to know him. We were lucky just to have the two of us. It was good.
Lovely, lovely. And Mark, you're part of the Reyou community as well.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so is Steph. So
Yeah.
yeah, you get
That's
to keep
good.
talking after this. Wonderful. Is there anyone else that wanted to share about their experience with the name story?
I can say something. Do you want to go ahead, Joe? We were in the same
No, you go
breakout
ahead.
room.
Yeah.
We were in the same breakout room, and I think we had a similarity that I didn't expect. Of the stories of our names, and also just the importance of the pronunciation of our names, and how it's linked with our history. So that was something interesting. And I mentioned that I will be trying to pronounce it properly. I'll try my best. But yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emma.
I was in the breakout room with Geraldine and Jacqueline, and pronunciation came up for us too. And in terms of my last name and in terms of Geraldine's first name, and I would be curious to know how they pronounced her first name in Argentina, because we didn't get to that, but I know that it was an issue. And Jacqueline told us all also about the origins of her name, and just we really got a sense of place and history of where she grew up, and it was lovely.
Lovely. Lovely. Thank you for sharing that, Christine. So how many people, sorry?
Can I say something? Yeah, I did it like I want to share like the last part of my story about my name is like my name is Geraldine, and it was never well pronounced in my country of origin until I came to Canada. So it was funny because that gave me kind of a sense of belonging that I didn't have back there, you know?
Yes, I can totally understand that. That makes so much sense. What a sense! That makes so much sense. But it's also so interesting that it's flipped around, because usually it's the other way around, right? Where it's pronounced better or properly in your home country, and then you go overseas and then it gets mispronounced. Yeah.
Usually that people call me Jacqueline. Jacqueline.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Sorry, Christine, was that your hand up, or are you going to go again with speaking? Or was it a wave?
It was a
Oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. And did anybody just show of hands, like how if your name gets auto-corrected when you write it on a computer? Just show of hands if your name gets auto-corrected. I think my camera is picking up that hand. Right. Wonderful. So we're like all the same peas in the pod here. But thank you so much for that. That was such a cool experience, and just listening to other persons. Like I always smile when people people tell me about their names, and when people ask me about their names, and I found now I'm smiling when I'm hearing people talk about the experience of learning about other people's names. I'm going to turn it back over to Amna in a moment to just tell us a little bit about what she thinks about the name story exercise, and then we'll go into our closing and wrap up.
Yeah, so there's so much that comes with this practice. As you can, I saw a lot of smiles when we came out of the breakout rooms. And, you know, names are our first gifts that we receive from someone else, our loved ones. So, you know, just unpacking that and thinking about, you know, we're connected to people before us, and, you know, we're connected to stories and cultures and languages that show up in our names. And there's so much more. It's a beautiful way of connecting. So storytelling doesn't have to be folk tales like you heard at the beginning of the session. It could be something as simple as doing name stories.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Amna. And I know, Amna, you like to leave us with a parting gift. And we're gonna end before 1 o'clock. So the story is gonna be really short. But Amna's parting gift to us is another story that we can take into the rest of our day. Go ahead, Amna.
Yeah. So it's a very short story. I know, because the lunch hour is almost done. Once there was a queen, and she always wore her favorite crown, her crown that used to dazzle with diamonds. And every afternoon, she would walk out of her palace and go to her palace gardens, where she would admire all the beauty surrounding her. And one day, she was standing on the bridge, looking at the pond underneath with water lilies and dragonflies buzzing around the water lilies. And in the stillness of the pond, she looked at her reflection. And then she looked further at the reflection of her crown. But when she did that, the crown fell into the pond. And she screamed, my crown, come and get my crown out from the pond. And as the queen was very resourceful, she was surrounded by soldiers and courtiers, generals, and one storyteller. They came one by one, and they tried to get the crown out, but the water had churned out and was murky and muddy. They couldn't see anything. The queen was so disappointed. Someone has to find my crown. And now all her staff, all the people that she ruled over, they had never heard the storyteller, because she would spend time listening to the stories, fantasy tales, tales from long ago, but they had never experienced that. So they were of the opinion that they did real work, and the storyteller, what use was he? Those fantasy tales, those funny tales, those folk tales, who cares about them? The storyteller asked, Your Majesty, allow me today to share a story with all of us gathered in this moment. And he started sharing the story. Once upon a time, there was a queen who lived in a beautiful palace surrounded by everyone. And she loved her crown. That was her treasure. It had all kinds of rubies and diamonds and emeralds. And he went on until everyone in the palace was under the spell of that story. And when he finished, he walked over to the pond. And now, because the sediments had settled, he could clearly see the crown shining in the sunlight. And he pulled that out and presented it to the queen. And everyone realized that storytellers have a lot to offer.
Thank you, Amna. For me, the offering there is mindfulness, quieting the mind, quieting the environment, the circumstances. Beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for Mindful Lunch today. We'll be sending out Amna's tool, the name story. It's a wonderful icebreaker tool. We'll send that along with the recording of today's session out by email to everyone who is registered. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you've got to get on to other parts of your day. Please feel free to connect with us within the community. The conversation continues there, and you'll find more information about that on our website, www.reyoumindfulness.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a pleasant rest of your day.